The first crack in my patience came the morning my phone lit up with yet another police alert. The same clipped message I'd heard for months, an anonymous caller reporting suspicious activity at my own address. I didn't need the dispatcher to finish. I already knew who had done it. Our HOA enforcer, a woman who treated bylaws like weapons and saw my property line as a battlefield, had spent nearly 90 days calling the cops on me for everything from walking to my mailbox to unloading groceries. She thought intimidation would wear me down. What she didn't realize was that every encounter, every false report, every attempt to corner me had been quietly recorded by my cameras. And the trench she later demanded I fill, that would become the final piece of evidence tying her to a crime she never imagined I could prove. If you've ever felt powerless against someone abusing small authority, you'll want to see how this ends. Because documentation, patience, and one well-placed ditch can change everything. But let me back up to where this really started. Not the phone alert this morning, but the first time I realized something was wrong. It was a Saturday in early March. One of those mornings where Oregon decides to pretend spring has arrived. I was out on the back patio with my coffee, watching Danny throw a tennis ball for Max. She was 9 years old then, still at that age where a golden retriever and a sunny morning were all she needed to be happy. The pines behind our property line swayed gently. Everything felt right. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up at 7:45 a.m. I saw it from the patio, that white and black Crown Vic rolling slowly into view. My wife, Elise, was inside. Halfway through washing breakfast dishes, I watched her freeze at the kitchen window, dish towel still gripped in one hand. We'd lived in Pinewood Estates for 7 years without incident. Cops didn't just show up on a Saturday morning unless someone had called them. Deputy Shane Carver walked up my driveway with his hands loose at his sides. No aggression in his posture. I met him at the front door. Danny had stopped playing. Max sat at her feet, tail still wagging. Shane gave me a nod and pulled a small notepad from his chest of drawers. He said, "Morning, Marcus. Got a call about a parking violation. Someone reported you've got a vehicle on your lawn, blocking the sidewalk." His tone was flat, like he was reading from a script he didn't believe. I looked past him at my driveway. My Honda CR-V sat exactly where it always sat, inside the garage. The door was open. You could see the whole thing from the street. I turned back to Shane and said, "There's no car on my lawn." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. He said, "Yeah, I kind of figured, but I got a report filed at 7:42 this morning. A complaint came from your HOA. Name on the report is Lorraine Bishop." He waited, watching my reaction. I asked, "What exactly did the report say?" Shane flipped a page in his notepad. Caller reported a vehicle parked on the front lawn in violation of community standards, obstructing pedestrian access on the sidewalk. She included your address and said it's been ongoing. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic, just a slow, creeping realization that this wasn't a mistake. I said, "Shane, I've got security cameras. I can pull the footage right now if you want." He shook his head. "I believe you, Marcus, but I still have to file a report because a complaint was made. That's the protocol." Protocol. That word would come up a lot in the months ahead. Shane scribbled something in his notepad and said, "For what it's worth, I'll note that no violation was observed upon arrival. You're good." Then he paused and added, "You have any issues with your HOA before this?" I thought about lying, keeping it simple, but the truth was already sitting there between us. I said, "Lorraine Bishop tried to buy a piece of my property about 6 months ago." I said no. Shane's expression didn't change, but I saw the smallest shift in his eyes. Understanding. He said, "Got it. Well, keep your footage. Might need it." Then he left. Elise came outside as soon as the cruiser pulled away. She wrapped her arms around herself and asked, "What did he want?" I told her. She stared at me for a long moment, then said, "Why would Lorraine call the cops over something that didn't happen?" I didn't have an answer yet. Not one that made sense, but I had a feeling, the kind that sits low in your gut and doesn't go away. I said, "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." I went inside and pulled up the security app on my phone. I'd installed the cameras a year earlier after a rash of package thefts in the neighborhood. 4 cameras total: front door, back patio, east side, West Side. All of them were recorded to cloud storage with motion detection. I scrolled back to 7:42 a.m., the exact time Lorraine's report was filed. The front camera showed my driveway, empty lawn, garage door closed, nothing is blocking the sidewalk. But then I saw something else. At 7:39 a.m., a black pickup truck rolled slowly past my house. It didn't stop. It just cruised by, slow enough that I could make out the driver if I zoomed in. I did. The face was familiar. Dylan Ricks, vice president of the Pinewood Estates HOA, Lorraine Bishop's right hand. He'd driven past my house 3 minutes before the complaint was filed. I watched the footage twice more. Dylan's truck slowed as it passed my driveway, almost to a crawl. Then it sped up and disappeared around the corner. He was checking, looking for something to report. And when he didn't find anything, Lorraine filed the complaint anyway. Elise leaned over my shoulder and watched the footage with me. She said, "That's Dylan." I nodded. She said, "Why would he do that?" I said, "Because Lorraine told him to." Elise pulled back, her face pale. She said, "Marcus, this is insane. They can't just call the cops on us for no reason." I looked at her and said, "They just did." That night, after Danny was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I pulled up the email Lorraine had sent me 6 months earlier. The subject line read, "Property acquisition opportunity." The body was short and businesslike. She wanted to purchase the 0.3 acres of land behind my house, the strip that ran along the back edge of my property and bordered the empty lot she owned. Her offer was $45,000. I'd looked up the assessed value at the time. That land was worth $85,000. Easy. Maybe more if you factored in development potential. I'd replied with a polite no. I wasn't interested in selling. I wanted the space for Danny to grow up in, for Max to run around in. Lorraine had replied within an hour. Her message was 2 sentences long. "I'm disappointed you're choosing to make this difficult. Mr. Hale, you'll regret not being more cooperative." At the time, I'd thought it was just bluster, the kind of passive-aggressive nonsense people say when they don't get their way. I'd deleted the email and moved on. Now, staring at it again, those 2 sentences felt different, heavier, like a warning I'd been too naive to recognize. I opened a new browser tab and pulled up the county assessor's website. I typed in Lorraine's name and searched for properties under her ownership. 3 results came up. Her primary residence is on Pinewood Drive, a rental property 2 towns over, and the empty lot directly behind my house, registered under something called the Bishop Family Trust. I clicked on the lot. The parcel map loaded. I zoomed in. My property line ran right along the edge of hers. If she owned my land, too, she could merge the parcels. The combined lot would be big enough to subdivide into 2 buildable lots. I ran a quick estimate based on comparable sales in the area. 2 subdivision lots in Pinewood Estates would sell for close to $380,000, maybe more. She wasn't trying to buy my land because she liked trees. She was trying to turn a profit. A big one. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Elise was standing in the doorway, watching me. She said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking Lorraine Bishop wants our land, and she's willing to make our lives hell until we sell it to her." Elise crossed her arms. She said, "So what do we do?" I looked at the footage, still paused on my phone. Dylan's black pickup is frozen mid-frame. I said, "We document everything, every email, every complaint, every time they come near this property. If she wants to play games, we play smarter." Elise nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She said, "You really think she'll keep pushing?" I looked back at the screen, at Lorraine's email still open in front of me. I said, "Yeah, I think she's just getting started." 10 days passed before the second incident. I'd started to think maybe the parking complaint was a one-time thing. Lorraine was testing the waters, seeing if I'd crack. I should have known better. The email arrived on a Thursday morning while I was at work. Subject line, HOA violation notice, trash receptacle. I opened it in my cubicle, coffee going cold beside my keyboard. The message was short and formal. According to community standards, trash bins must be returned to the garage within 12 hours of collection. Mine had been visible from the street past the 7 p.m. deadline on Wednesday. Fine, $150. Remedy period, 48 hours. I stared at the timestamp on the email, sent at 6:50 p.m. on Wednesday. I pulled up my security app and scrolled back to Wednesday evening. The footage showed me wheeling both bins up the driveway at exactly 6:15 p.m. They disappeared into the garage. The door closed. 35 minutes before the email was sent. 35 minutes before the supposed violation could have even occurred. I took a screenshot of the footage, attached it to a reply, and wrote 3 sentences. Bins were returned to the garage at 6:15 p.m. Please see attached footage. Kindly withdraw this notice. I hit send and waited. No response came. That night, I told Elise about it over dinner. Danny was upstairs doing homework. Elise set her fork down and said, "They're doing this on purpose." I nodded. She said, "What happens if you don't pay?" I said, "Unpaid fines accumulate. If they hit a certain threshold, the HOA can place a lien on the property. It complicates selling, refinancing, anything that touches the title." She went very still. Then she said, "So what do we do?" I said, "We document everything and wait for them to make a mistake." The third incident happened 6 days later. 11:07 p.m. I was in bed, half asleep. When the doorbell rang, Elise sat up fast, her hand going to my arm. I pulled on a shirt and went downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw Deputy Shane standing on my porch, looking uncomfortable. I opened the door. Shane said, "Sorry to bother you this late. Got a noise complaint. Caller said there's a party at this address. Loud music. Possible disturbance." I stepped aside and gestured into the house. The living room was dark. The TV was off. Upstairs, Danny's bedroom light was out. She'd been asleep since 9. I said, "Does this look like a party to you?" Shane glanced past me, then shook his head. He said, "No, it doesn't." He pulled out his notepad, made a quick notation, and tucked it away. Then he leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. He said, "Marcus, this is the 3rd call this week from your HOA, not just about you. Different houses, different complaints. All of them turned out to be nothing." I felt something click into place. I said, "They're flooding you with false reports." Shane didn't confirm it outright, but he didn't deny it either. He said, "Just keep documenting. If this keeps up, it becomes a pattern, and patterns are prosecutable." Then he left. I stood in the doorway for a long time after his cruiser pulled away. Elise came downstairs in her robe and asked what had happened. I told her. She wrapped her arms around herself and said, "How long can they keep this up?" I said, "As long as we let them." 3 days later, another violation notice arrived. Lawn height exceeding 3 inches. I went outside with a tape measure and checked 5 random spots. 2.6 inches, 2.8, 2.7, all under 3. I photographed each measurement and sent it to the HOA. No response. The fine stood, $150. Remedy period, 48 hours. That weekend, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened a new spreadsheet. I labeled the columns date, time, violation type, HOA claim, actual facts, evidence, response. I went back through my emails and filled in every incident. Parking complaint, trash bins, noise, lawn height. 4 violations in 3 weeks. Every single one is provably false. Every single one was ignored when I provided evidence. The fines totaled $600. At this rate, we'd hit the lien threshold in less than 2 months. I pulled up the HOA bylaws next. 53 pages of dense legalese. I skimmed through sections on enforcement procedures and dispute resolution. One clause caught my eye. All violation notices must include photographic evidence and specific citation of the bylaw section violated. I went back through the emails. Not one included a photo. Not one cited a specific section number. They were violating their own rules. I highlighted the clause, saved a PDF, and added it to a new folder on my desktop. I labeled the folder HOA Evidence. Sunday afternoon, a certified letter arrived. I had to sign for it. The return address was from a law office in Portland. I opened it standing in the driveway. Notice of intent, continued violations. It listed all 4 incidents, plus 2 I hadn't even been notified about. Something about exterior paint color and unapproved landscaping. The letter claimed I owed $1,350 in accumulated fines. I had 14 days to pay, or the HOA would pursue legal remedies, including a property lien. I walked back inside and set the letter on the kitchen table. Elise read it, her face going pale. She said, "We can't afford to fight a legal battle." I said, "We're not going to. We're going to make them fight one." I opened my laptop and logged into the county assessor's site. I pulled up Lorraine's property records again. This time, I dug deeper into the tax history for the empty lot behind our house. She'd purchased it 4 years ago for $90,000. Current assessed value, $120,000. The numbers confirmed what I already suspected. She wasn't backing off because she'd already committed. If she failed now, she'd have nothing but a harassment complaint against her. Elise sat down across from me. She said, "So what do we do?" I pulled up Amazon on my phone and searched for outdoor security cameras. 4 camera kits, 4K resolution, night vision, cloud storage. Motion alerts are sent directly to my phone. I found a system with good reviews and selected 2-day shipping. $199. I hit purchase. Elise watched me and said, "You're really doing this," I said. "If she wants a paper trail, I'll give her one. But it's going to be mine, not hers." That night, I downloaded every email, every notice, every piece of correspondence from the HOA. I backed it up to 3 separate locations: Google Drive, Dropbox, an external hard drive I kept in my desk drawer. If Lorraine wanted to bury me in paperwork, fine, I'd bury her in evidence. 2 days later, the cameras arrived. The cameras went up on a Wednesday afternoon. I mounted them myself. One above the front door, angled to cover the driveway and sidewalk. One on the back patio, facing the yard and the property line. 2 more on the east and west corners of the house, overlapping coverage to eliminate blind spots. Motion detection sent alerts straight to my phone. Cloud storage kept 30 days of footage. I spent 3 hours running cables, syncing the system, and testing angles. When I finished, I had a complete view of everything that happened on my property. Every approach, every movement, every second. That first night, I stayed up until 1 a.m. watching the live feeds on my laptop. Nothing happened. A raccoon wandered through the backyard around midnight. A car drove past the front at 12:30. Otherwise, silence. I felt ridiculous sitting there in the dark, staring at empty camera feeds like I was expecting an invasion. Elise came downstairs around 1:15 and found me still at the kitchen table. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my shoulder, squeezed once, and went back to bed. I followed 10 minutes later. The next day, another email arrived from the HOA. Complaint, exterior lighting disturbance. According to the message, my patio lights were creating a nuisance for neighboring properties by remaining illuminated throughout the night. I walked outside and checked. The patio lights were motion activated. They turned on when something moved within 15 feet and shut off automatically after 5 minutes. I installed them 2 years ago. They'd never been a problem before. I looked at the neighbor's house to the left. Their porch light stayed on 24/7. The neighbor to the right had floodlights that lit up half the street. But apparently, my motion sensor LEDs were the issue. I didn't bother replying this time. I just saved the email to the evidence folder and added it to the spreadsheet. Incident number 5. No photo evidence. No bylaw citation. Same pattern as all the others. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 3:20 a.m. Motion alert. Back camera. I jolted awake, grabbed the phone off the nightstand, and opened the app. The feed is loaded. It took me 2 seconds to process what I was seeing. A man stood at the back fence, just inside my property line. He wore a dark hoodie, hood pulled up. In his right hand, he held a flashlight. He was pointing it directly at the second-floor window. Danny's window. I threw off the covers and bolted downstairs. Elise called after me, but I didn't stop. I hit the back door, flipped on every exterior light, and stepped onto the patio. The man at the fence turned. The flashlight beam swung toward me, blinding for half a second, then dropped. I saw his face clearly in the flood of light. Dylan Ricks. He stared at me for 2 seconds. Then he turned and vaulted over the fence into the empty lot behind my house. I heard his boots hit the ground. Then nothing. I didn't chase him. Every instinct told me to. But I didn't. I stood there on the patio, breathing hard, and made myself count to 10. The camera had caught everything. That mattered more than catching Dylan in the moment. I went back inside, locked the door, and pulled up the footage. 3:18 a.m. Dylan appears at the fence line. 3:19 a.m. He climbs over, lands on my side, and walks 5 feet into my yard. 3:20 a.m. He raises the flashlight and aims it at Danny's window, holds it there for 40 seconds. 3:21 a.m. I turn on the lights. He runs. I saved the clip and backed it up to 3 locations. Then I sat at the kitchen table and waited for my hands to stop shaking. Elise came down in her robe and sat across from me. She didn't ask what happened. She just watched the footage on my phone. When it ended, she said, "He was pointing a light at our daughter's window." Her voice was flat, not angry, worse than angry. I said, "Yeah," she said. "Why?" I said. "She wants us rattled, wants us to make mistakes." At 8:30 that morning, I called the HOA office. A receptionist answered. I said I needed to speak with Lorraine Bishop. The woman on the other end said, "Mrs. Bishop is unavailable. You can send an email." I said, "I need to report a trespassing incident. Your vice president was on my property at 3 a.m. Silence on the other end. 5 full seconds. Then the receptionist said, "I'll pass along the message." She hung up. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Lorraine's voice came through, smooth and controlled. She said, "Mr. Hale, I understand you have concerns about Mr. Ricks." I said, "He was on my property in the middle of the night. I have video." She didn't miss a beat. She said, "Dylan was conducting a boundary survey. We received a complaint that your fence may extend past your property line. He was verifying the markers." I felt my jaw tighten. I said, "At 3 in the morning, with a flashlight pointed at my daughter's bedroom window." Lorraine's tone shifted, still polite, but colder. She said, "If you feel unsafe, Mr. Hale, perhaps this neighborhood isn't suitable for your family. I'm still willing to make an offer on your land. $50,000. That's $5,000 more than my original proposal. The offer expires in 7 days." I said, "I'm not selling." She said, "Suit yourself." Then, just before she hung up, she added, "You have a daughter at Oak Ridge Elementary, don't you, 4th grade?" My blood went cold. I said, "What did you just say?" Her voice stayed perfectly even. She said, "I'm simply noting that you have a young child. It must be stressful, having the police show up at your home so frequently. Child Protective Services tends to take note of that sort of thing. Unstable home environments. It's their job." I gripped the phone hard enough that my knuckles went white. I said, "If you threaten my daughter again." She cut me off. "I'm not threatening anyone. Mr. Hale, I'm offering helpful advice, but if you insist on making this difficult, well, consequences tend to follow." The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone for a full minute. Then I added the call recording to my evidence folder. The next day, the cops came again. This time it wasn't Shane. It was a younger officer I didn't recognize. Name tag read Brennan. He stood on my porch and said, "We received a report that you threatened an HOA employee." I blinked. "I did what?" Brennan checked his notepad. "Caller states you made a threatening phone call yesterday morning. Said you'd, quote, take care of her if she didn't stop interfering." I felt something twist in my chest. I said, "I didn't call anyone. Lorraine Bishop called me. I have the call log and a recording." Brennan looked skeptical. He said, "You recorded the call," I said. "My phone auto-records for work compliance. I'm in software. It's standard." That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. Brennan made a note and said, "I'll need a copy of that recording." I said, "Fine. However, you should be aware that this is the 4th time the police have been called to my house in the last month. Every single report has been false. I have documentation." Brennan's expression didn't change. He said, "That's not my department. I'm just following up on today's complaint." He took my information, said someone might contact me for the recording, and left. His tone made it clear he thought I was the problem. That night, Danny came downstairs while Elise and I were talking in the kitchen. Her eyes were red. She said, "Daddy, why do the police keep coming to our house?" Elise reached for her, but Danny stayed in the doorway. She said, "My friend Emma asked me if you did something bad. She said her mom said the cops don't come unless someone's in trouble." I felt something crack inside me. Not anger, something worse. I knelt so I was eye level with her and said, "I didn't do anything wrong. Sweetheart, some people are just being mean right now. However, it will stop soon. I promise." She nodded, but the fear didn't leave her face. After she went back upstairs, Elise sat down across from me. Her face was pale. She said, "Marcus, we can't keep living like this." I said, "I know," she said. "So what do we do?" I pulled up the spreadsheet on my laptop and turned it toward her. 4 weeks, 7 incidents, 3 false police calls, 1 trespassing, 1 direct threat. I said, "We make sure every piece of this is documented, and we wait for them to cross the line far enough that the law has to act." Elise stared at the screen. She said, "What if they don't stop before it's too late?" I said, "Then we make them stop." I didn't know how yet, but I knew I was done playing defense. Later that night, I checked the cameras one more time before bed. The front feed showed the street, empty and quiet. The back showed the yard, still and dark. Then I switched to the east side camera. At the far edge of the frame, barely visible, a black pickup truck sat parked at the end of the street. Lights off, engine off. It had been there for 23 minutes according to the timestamp. I zoomed in as far as the camera would allow. I couldn't make out the driver, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly who it was. The certified letter arrived on a Monday morning. I had to sign for it. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a return address from a law firm in Portland. I opened it standing in my driveway. Notice of intent to file lien. Outstanding HOA violations. The letter listed 9 separate incidents over the past 6 weeks. Most of them I'd never even been notified about. Unapproved window treatments, unauthorized tree trimming, non-compliant mailbox placement. Total owed $1,350. 14 days to pay. I read the letter twice. Then I got in my car and drove to a law office downtown. I'd made the appointment 3 days earlier with a real estate attorney named Jennifer Caldwell. Her office was small, tucked between a coffee shop and a dry cleaner. She met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Willamette River. I handed her the letter and the entire evidence folder I'd compiled. She spent 40 minutes going through everything without saying a word. When she finally looked up, she said, "This is textbook harassment. But here's your problem. HOAs have broad authority to enforce covenants. Unless you can prove malicious intent, this stays in civil court, and civil court is expensive," I said. "I have video of their vice president trespassing on my property. I have recordings of threats." Jennifer nodded. She said, "That helps, but you need a clear pattern that shows they're fabricating violations to force a specific outcome. Right now, you have harassment. What you need is a conspiracy." I leaned back in my chair. I said, "So what do I do?" She tapped the property records I'd printed. She said, "You said she wants your land. If that's true, she'll have to make a move eventually. Physical, not just paperwork. You need to create an opportunity for her to expose herself." I didn't understand at first. She continued, "If they believe your boundary line is disputed, they might try to prove it. Illegally. That's when you get them." I drove home thinking about what she'd said. Create an opportunity. Force them to overreach. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the back fence line. The property survey from when I bought the house was filed with the county. The boundary was clear. My fence sat 2 feet inside my actual property line. There was a strip of overgrown grass between the fence and the true edge of my land. Most people wouldn't notice, but if Lorraine was claiming a boundary dispute, that strip mattered. That afternoon, I walked the back perimeter with a tape measure and the survey map. The property line ran along the edge of the empty lot Lorraine owned. I pulled up the county building code on my phone. Section 18.40, Residential Drainage Improvements. Property owners were permitted to install drainage systems to prevent water accumulation. No permit required for ditches under 4 feet deep. I called a local contractor and got a quote. He could dig a drainage trench along the back property line, 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, running the full length of the boundary. $800. 2 days. I said yes. The excavation started on Thursday morning. The contractor showed up with a small backhoe and 2 workers. Elise watched from the kitchen window as they marked out the trench line with spray paint. Danny asked what they were doing. I told her we were fixing a drainage problem so the yard wouldn't flood during heavy rain. It wasn't a lie. Oregon got plenty of rain. But that wasn't why I was digging it. By Friday afternoon, the trench was finished. 3 feet deep, 4 feet across. It ran along the entire back edge of my property, right along the survey line. From my yard, it looked like a simple drainage ditch. From the empty lot behind my house, it looked like a barrier. I repositioned 2 of my security cameras to cover the trench from both angles. If anyone tried to cross from Lorraine's lot onto mine, I'd have it on camera. That night, I got an email from the HOA. Unauthorized excavation. I was ordered to fill in the trench within 48 hours or face additional fines. I replied with a copy of the county code and a screenshot of the drainage permit I'd filed that morning. $50. Approved online in less than 2 hours. The county didn't care about HOA bylaws. Drainage was a property right. Lorraine didn't respond. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Motion alert. Back camera. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and opened the app. The feed loaded in night vision. Everything rendered in shades of gray and white. A vehicle was moving slowly through the empty lot behind my house. Headlights off. A pickup truck. Black. I recognized the shape immediately. Dylan's truck. I watched the screen. The truck rolled forward, heading toward the gap between the old fence and the trench. There used to be a dirt path there, barely wide enough for a vehicle. Dylan had used it before. He probably thought it was still clear. The truck kept coming. Slow, steady. I could see Dylan's silhouette behind the wheel. He wasn't stopping. He was going to drive straight through. The front wheels hit the edge of the trench. For a split second, the truck seemed to hang there, balanced. Then the nose dropped, hard. The front axle slammed into the bottom of the ditch with a sound I could hear through the closed window. Metal on earth. The back wheels lifted off the ground. The truck settled at a 45-degree angle. Front end buried. Rear bumper pointing at the sky. I didn't move. I just watched the camera feed. Dylan's door opened. He climbed out, stumbling as he hit the ground. He walked around to the front of the truck and stared down into the trench. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. That's when he looked up, straight at the camera. His face was fully visible, clear, undeniable. He stood there for 3 seconds. Then he turned and ran back toward the empty lot, leaving the truck behind. I went downstairs and called 911. The dispatcher answered and I said, "I need to report a trespassing incident and property damage. Someone just drove a vehicle onto my land." She asked for my address. I gave it. She asked if anyone was injured. I said no. She said a deputy would be there within 20 minutes. Elise came down a few minutes later. She looked at my phone, at the paused footage of Dylan's truck, nose down in the trench. She said, "You knew this would happen." I said, "I hoped it would." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she said, "What happens now?" I said, "Now we let the law do its job." Deputy Shane Carver arrived 18 minutes later. I met him at the front door and walked him around to the back. He shone his flashlight into the trench. Dylan's truck sat exactly where it had landed. Front bumper caved in. Headlights shattered. Shane looked at the truck. Then he looked at me. He said, "When did you dig this?" I said. 3 days ago. I have a county permit for drainage." Shane nodded slowly. He said, "And the driver?" I said. "Dylan Ricks, HOA vice president. He ran after the truck went in. I have the whole thing on camera." Shane pulled out his notepad. He said, "Show me." I handed him my phone. He watched the footage from start to finish. His expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in his eyes. When the video ended, he said, "This is the 6th time you've reported HOA-related incidents in 2 months." I said, "7th, if you count the trespassing 3 weeks ago." Shane looked back at the truck. He said, "Marcus, I'm going to need copies of all your footage. Everything from the past 8 weeks. Can you do that?" I said, "I can have it ready by tomorrow morning." But Shane made notes for another 10 minutes. He took photos of the truck, the trench, and the property line. Then he called a tow company and arranged to have Dylan's vehicle removed. Before he left, He stopped at his cruiser and turned back to me. He said, "You know this isn't going to end quietly," I said. "I know," he said. "You ready for that?" I looked back at the trench, at the space where the truck had been. I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." The next morning, Dylan's pickup truck was still sitting in the trench. The sheriff's department had arranged for a tow, but the company wouldn't arrive until the afternoon. I stood at the back window with my coffee, looking at the rear bumper sticking up at an angle, and waited. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know when. Lorraine Bishop showed up at 9:15 a.m. I watched her black Lexus pull into my driveway and park behind my car, blocking me in. She got out wearing a gray suit, heels clicking on the concrete, as she walked to my front door. I didn't wait for her to ring the bell. I opened the door and stood in the frame, one hand on the knob. She stopped 2 feet away and looked at me with the kind of cold, controlled anger that comes from someone used to getting their way. She said, "Mr. Hale, we need to talk," I said. "I don't have anything to say to you." She glanced past me into the house, then back at my face. She said, "You just caused significant property damage to my vice president's vehicle. You could be sued," I said. "He drove onto my property without permission. At midnight. I have footage and a police report. If anyone's getting sued, it's him." Her jaw tightened. She said, "That trench is a hazard. You put it there deliberately," I said. "I put it there for drainage. I have a county permit. It's completely legal." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lorraine took a small step closer. Her voice dropped, quiet and precise. She said, "You have a daughter, 9 years old, Oak Ridge Elementary, correct?" I felt every muscle in my body go tight. I said, "Don't." She continued like I hadn't spoken. She said, "Police showing up at your home every week. That creates a record. Child Protective Services reviews those records when they get reports of unstable households." She paused. "Of course, all of this could go away. $50,000 for your land. You take the money, move somewhere more suitable, and everyone moves on." I stared at her. I said, "Get off my property." She didn't move. She said, "You have 48 hours to think about it. After that, I can't control what reports get filed." Then she turned and walked back to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away. My doorbell camera had recorded the entire conversation, audio and video. I saved the file immediately. That night, the cops came again. 8:32 p.m. We were finishing dinner. Danny was upstairs in her room. The doorbell rang, and Elise went to answer it. I heard her voice, tight and worried, and got up from the table. 2 officers stood on the porch. One was Shane. The other was Brennan. Shane looked uncomfortable. Brennan said, "We received a report of a domestic disturbance at this address. Shouting, possible physical altercation." I felt something cold settle in my chest. I said, "There's no disturbance. We were having dinner." Shane said, "Can we come in and verify?" I stepped aside. They walked through, looked around briefly. Brennan made a note and said, "Everything looks fine. Sorry to bother you." Shane lingered for a moment after Brennan went back to the car. He said quietly, "Marcus, this is getting out of hand. Document everything. I'm going to talk to my supervisor about opening a formal investigation." Then he left. I closed the door and locked it. Elise stood in the hallway, staring at me. She sat down on the bottom step of the stairs and put her face in her hands. She said, "I can't do this anymore. Every time the doorbell rings, I think it's the cops. Danny is scared all the time." Her voice broke. She said, "Marcus, we should just sell. Take the money and leave." Before I could answer, Danny appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were red. She said, "Are the police taking Daddy away?" Elise stood up quickly and said, "No, sweetie. No one's taking anyone away." I climbed the stairs and knelt next to her. I said, "Danny, everything that's happening right now is because some people are trying to scare us into leaving. But we're not leaving, and I'm going to make sure they can't do this anymore." She said, "When?" I didn't have a good answer. I just said, "Soon, I promise." After she went back to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Elise sat across from me. She said, "What are you doing?" I said. "Building a case." I opened a new document and started typing. Every incident, every false report, every piece of footage, every email. I organized it chronologically. I pulled up the call logs from my phone and matched them to police visits. Dylan's truck appeared before complaints. Lorraine's phone calls preceding escalations. The timing of violations that couldn't possibly have been observed. I worked for 3 hours. Elise watched me for a while, then went upstairs. At 11:45 p.m., I had a 47-page document. Timeline, evidence, witness statements from neighbors who'd also received false violations, property records showing Lorraine's financial motive, audio of her CPS threat, video of Dylan trespassing, video of his truck in my trench, police reports for every false call. I saved it, backed it up. Then I opened my email and started a new message. The recipient was Detective Sarah Malloy at the county sheriff's office. Shane had mentioned her name twice. She handled fraud and harassment cases. I attached the full document and 23 video files. In the body of the email, I wrote 3 paragraphs. I explained the situation. I explained the pattern. I explained that I believed Lorraine Bishop and Dylan Ricks were engaged in a coordinated campaign of harassment to force the sale of my property, and that their actions had escalated to criminal intimidation and filing false police reports. I asked for a formal investigation. I hit send at 12:17 a.m. The reply came at 8:32 the next morning. "Mr. Hale, I've reviewed your evidence. I'd like you to come to the station this afternoon for a formal statement. 2 p.m. Bring all physical evidence you have. Detective S. Malloy." I read the email 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Jennifer Caldwell, my attorney. She replied within 10 minutes. "Go. Be honest. Don't embellish. Stick to facts. This is good." I looked out the back window. Dylan's truck was gone. The tow company had finally come. The trench sat empty, a dark line cutting across the edge of my property. I thought about Lorraine's threat. 48 hours. That deadline would hit tomorrow. I didn't know if she'd actually call CPS. I didn't know if they'd take her seriously. But I knew one thing. I was done reacting. From now on, I was setting the terms. Elise came downstairs and saw me standing at the window. She said, "What happens now?" I turned and showed her the email from Detective Malloy. She read it, then looked at me. She said, "Do you really think they'll do something?" I said, "I think we're about to find out." I arrived at the sheriff's station 15 minutes early. The building was low and modern, all concrete and tinted dull glass. I parked in the visitor lot and sat in my car for a moment, going through the checklist in my head. A laptop with all the video files, external hard drive with backups, printed timeline, printed emails, property records, audio recordings on a separate USB drive. I'd organized everything the night before, triple-checked it this morning. I grabbed the messenger bag from the passenger seat and went inside. The front desk officer directed me to the second floor. Detective Sarah Malloy met me in a small conference room with white walls and fluorescent lighting. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that didn't miss much. She shook my hand and gestured to a chair. She said, "Mr. Hale, I've been going through what you sent me. It's extensive," I said. "I wanted to make sure you had everything." She nodded and opened a folder on the table. She said, "Before we start the formal statement, I need to explain something. What you're describing is harassment. That's clear. But harassment alone is hard to prosecute unless we can prove criminal intent and a specific unlawful goal." I said, "They're trying to force me to sell my property. They've fabricated violations, filed false police reports, trespassed, and threatened to involve CPS if I don't comply." Malloy nodded. She said, "I believe you, but believing you and proving it in court are different things. What I need is a clear chain of evidence that shows 3 things. First, that they knowingly fabricated the violations. Second, that they coordinated these actions with the intent to harass. Third, that they did this to achieve an unlawful outcome, specifically forcing a property sale under duress." I pulled out the printed timeline and slid it across the table. I said, "Every violation notice is timestamped. Everyone contradicts video evidence from the same time period. The pattern is consistent." Malloy studied the document. She said, "Good. That establishes fabrication. What about coordination? I opened my laptop and pulled up a split-screen video I'd created the night before. On the left side, timestamps from Lorraine's phone calls to me. On the right side, timestamps of Dylan's truck appear on my camera. I'd synced them. Every call from Lorraine was followed within 24 to 48 hours by Dylan surveilling my property, followed by a new violation notice. Malloy watched the video twice. She said, "That's strong, but I need more than correlation. I need proof they were working together." I opened the audio file from my doorbell camera. Lorraine's voice, clear and unmistakable. Threatened CPS involvement if I didn't sell. Malloy listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When it ended, she sat back and said, "That's criminal intimidation. Class C felony in Oregon, if we can prove it was made to compel you into a specific action." I said, "Selling my land." She said, "Exactly." We spent the next hour going through every piece of evidence. Malloy took notes, asked questions, and paused videos to examine details. She wanted to know exact dates, exact times, exact sequences of events. I walked her through it all. The first false parking complaint, the trash bin violation sent before the deadline, the noise complaint at 11 p.m. when my house was dark and silent, Dylan's trespassing incidents, the trench, the truck. She wrote everything down in precise, methodical detail. When we finished, Malloy closed her notebook and said, "Here's what I can do. I can request a warrant to subpoena HOA records, phone logs, emails, and meeting minutes. If Lorraine and Dylan coordinated this through official HOA channels, it'll show up. But that takes time. 2 weeks minimum, maybe more." I said, "What happens in the meantime?" She said, "You keep documenting. You don't engage with them. You don't respond to any more violation notices. You let everything come through me." I thought about that. I said, "There's an HOA board meeting next week. I'm allowed to attend as a homeowner." Tim Malloy looked at me carefully. She said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "Public comment period. 3 minutes. I can present the evidence in front of the entire community." Malloy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's risky. If Lorraine feels cornered in public, she might escalate." I said, "She's already escalated. She threatened my daughter." Malloy nodded slowly. She said, "When's the meeting?" I checked my phone. I said, "October 15th, 7 p.m., Community Center." Malloy made a note. She said, "If you're going to do that, do it right. Keep it factual. No accusations you can't back up. Stick to what you can prove. And make sure you have copies of everything for anyone who asks." She paused. Then she said, "I'll be there." I looked up. She said, "Plain clothes, if what you're saying is true, and I think it is, Lorraine Bishop is going to react. When she does, I want to see it." I left the station at 4:30 p.m. with a clear sense of what needed to happen next. I had 1 week to prepare, 1 week to build a presentation that would lay out the entire case in 3 minutes, 1 week to make sure every detail was airtight. I drove home and went straight to my office. I opened a new PowerPoint file and started building slides. Slide 1 timeline graphic showing complaint frequency over 8 weeks. Slide 2 side-by-side comparison of violation claims versus video evidence. Slide 3 property records showing Lorraine's ownership of the adjacent lot and potential profit motive. Slide 4 audio waveform of the CPS threat. Slide 5 pattern of Dylan's surveillance preceding each complaint. I worked until midnight. Elise brought me coffee around 10 and asked what I was doing. I showed her. She watched the slideshow from beginning to end. When it finished, she said, "This is really happening," I said. "Yeah," she said. "What if they try to stop you from speaking?" I said, "They can't. HOA bylaws guarantee homeowners the right to public comment." I checked. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her face. She said, "Be careful," I said. "I will." Over the next 6 days, I refined the presentation. I cut unnecessary details. I tightened the language. I rehearsed the 3-minute speech until I could deliver it without notes. I printed 50 copies of a 1-page evidence summary with QR codes linking to the full video archive. I burned 5 USB drives with the complete footage, each one labeled and dated. I contacted 3 neighbors who'd also received false violations and asked if they'd be willing to speak. 2 of them said yes. On October 14th, the day before the meeting, I got an email from the HOA. Subject, board meeting agenda revision. The body was brief. Due to time constraints, the public comment period had been moved to the end of the meeting and limited to 90 seconds per speaker. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Detective Malloy with a blind copy. She replied 5 minutes later. Noted. Doesn't matter. 90 seconds is enough. I'll be there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through the speech in my head. Elise was awake too. She said, "What if this doesn't work?" I said, "Then we try something else." She said, "I'm scared." I said, "Me too." She rolled over and looked at me in the dark. She said, "But you're still doing it." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Why?" I thought about that. I said, "Because if we don't, she wins. And if she wins here, she'll do it to someone else. Someone who doesn't have cameras or records or the patience to fight back." Elise was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." "What?" She said, "Okay. We fight." The next day moved slowly. I took the afternoon off work. I went through the presentation one more time. I checked the USB drives. I checked the printed summaries. I packed everything into my messenger bag and set it by the front door. At 6:15 p.m., I put on a clean shirt and khakis. Elise stayed home with Danny. We'd agreed it was better if she wasn't there. I didn't want her to see what might happen. I arrived at the community center at 6:45. The parking lot was already half full. I recognized most of the cars, neighbors I'd waved to for 7 years, people I'd talked to at summer barbecues and holiday parties. I wondered how many of them knew what Lorraine had been doing. I wondered how many of them had been targeted. 2. I grabbed my bag and walked inside. The meeting room was set up with 60 folding chairs, facing a long table at the front. Lorraine sat in the center chair. Dylan to her right. 3 other board members filled out the rest of the table. I counted 34 people in the audience, more than I'd expected. I took a seat in the back row. 2 rows ahead of me, a woman in jeans and a blazer sat with a small notebook in her lap. She didn't look at me, but I knew who she was. Detective Malloy. Lorraine called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. She went through the standard agenda: budget review, landscaping contract updates, new parking enforcement proposals. When she got to the parking section, she proposed immediate towing for any vehicle in violation of community standards. No warning. $250 fee. Dylan seconded the motion. I watched 15 people in the room shift uncomfortably. One man raised his hand and asked how violations would be determined. Lorraine said the board would conduct regular patrols. The man sat down, looking unhappy. At 7:52, Lorraine announced the public comment period. She said, "We have 20 minutes. Each speaker gets 90 seconds. Please keep comments brief and relevant." 3 people spoke before me. 2 complained about pool hours. 1 asked about leaf cleanup schedules. Then I stood up. I walked to the front of the room. 34 faces turned toward me, some curious, some confused. A few already knew. Lorraine watched me from behind the table, her face perfectly composed. Dylan sat rigid beside her. I set my messenger bag down and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not because I needed it, because it gave my hand something to do. I said, "My name is Marcus Hale, 412 Pinewood Drive. 7 years here." I paused. The room went silent. In the past 8 weeks, this HOA issued 9 violation notices against my property. Every single one was false. I have time-stamped video proving no violations occurred. Murmurs started. I kept going. The HOA called the police to my home 7 times. Parking violations that didn't exist. Noise disturbances that never happened. Domestic disputes that were fiction. Lorraine leaned forward, voice calm. "Mr. Hale, this isn't the appropriate forum for—" I said. "I have 90 seconds. I'm using them." She sat back, expression unchanged. I continued. 6 months ago, President Bishop offered $45,000 for 0.3 acres of my land, worth $85,000. I declined. Harassment began immediately. I held up a USB drive. Video of Vice President Ricks trespassing 6 times. Audio of Mrs. Bishop threatening false CPS reports if I didn't sell. Documentation showing every violation sent without required photographic evidence. The murmurs grew louder. A woman 3 rows back stood. Linda Chen, 47, Pinewood Drive. I got 3 violations in August. All wrong. Appeal ignored. A man near the front said, "My garage door, wrong color." They said, "Same color for 5 years." More voices. I looked at Lorraine. Her jaw tightened. I said, "This isn't about standards. It's about intimidation. It ends tonight." I pulled out the printed summaries and handed them to the nearest people. Everything documented here: video, timeline, police reports, property records showing Mrs. Bishop's lot behind mine. The papers moved through rows, heads shaking. Someone said, "This can't be legal." Lorraine stood. Her voice was sharp, controlled. "This is slander. Baseless accusations to avoid legitimate fines," I said. "Explain why you own the empty lot behind my house. Explain why merging lets you subdivide and sell for $380,000. Explain the profit." Her face flushed slightly. She said, "Public record. Nothing illegal about owning land." I said, "There is when you harass neighbors into selling theirs." Dylan stood. "You dug that trench to trap my truck. Thousands in damage." I turned to him. "You drove onto my property at midnight. I have county permits. What's illegal is trespassing 6 times. At 3 a.m., I pointed a flashlight at my daughter's window." The room went dead silent. I let it sit. Linda spoke again. "You did that," Dylan said. "I was checking boundary markers." Linda's voice rose. "That's not business. That's stalking." Other voices joined. "How many has she targeted?" "I got 4 violations in September." I watched Lorraine. Her hands gripped the table edge. She said, "This community has standards. When people refuse to follow them, enforcement is necessary," I said. "Enforcement requires evidence. You've provided none." Her voice got louder. "I don't need to justify enforcement to you. The board has full authority to—" I cut her off. "Bylaws require photographic evidence and specific citations. You've violated your own rules." Lorraine's hand hit the table. Hard. The crack echoed. She said, "You want to know why?" Her voice was shaking now. "The control is slipping. Because people like you think you can do whatever you want. Ignore the board. Ignore people who've been here longer." She leaned forward. "I've been president for 9 years. I've maintained property values. And when I find an opportunity to improve things, increase value for everyone, I'm not letting some software engineer who's been here 7 years stand in my way." The room froze. No one moved. Lorraine realized what she'd said. Her face drained white. She sat down hard. Dylan looked at her, at me, at the crowd. He said, "She didn't mean," but stopped. He had nothing. I didn't speak. Didn't need to. 3 seconds of silence. Then a woman in jeans and a blazer stood from the 3rd row. She didn't say anything at first, just reached into her jacket. The room watched. She pulled out a badge and held it up. "Detective Sarah Malloy, County Sheriff's Office." The air changed. Lorraine stared. Malloy continued. "Mrs. Bishop, Mr. Ricks, I need you both to stay after this meeting." Her voice was level, professional. "I've been investigating harassment, false police reports, and criminal intimidation. What I just heard constitutes an admission of motive. Combined with Mr. Hale's evidence, I have probable cause." Lorraine's mouth opened. No sound. Dylan said, "You can't," Malloy said. "I can. Station tomorrow morning. Formal interviews. If you don't cooperate, I'll request warrants." She looked around the room. "If anyone else experienced similar harassment, see me after. Your testimony may be relevant." 6 people stood immediately. Then 3 more. 2 more. 11 total. I watched Lorraine see them stand. She looked smaller. The authority she'd held for 9 years was dissolving. One board member, Richard, stood. I move to suspend Mrs. Bishop and Mr. Ricks pending the investigation outcome. Another, Patricia, said. Second, Richard said. All in favor. 4 hands. Only Lorraine and Dylan abstained. Motion passes. Meeting adjourned. People stood. Some came to me. Handshakes. Thank you. I can't believe you documented all that. How long did this take? 8 weeks, I said. Detective Malloy walked over. Quietly. That went better than expected, I said. She admitted it. Malloy nodded. In front of 36 witnesses. Makes the case easier. Lorraine sat alone at the table. Dylan by the door. Phone to ear. Probably calling a lawyer. The other board members clustered near the windows. People are leaving slowly. Everyone talking. The energy had shifted. Not fear. Something else. Relief. Solidarity. I picked up my bag. Malloy stopped me. Need your full evidence package by Monday, I said. 3 USB drives. I'll drop them tomorrow. Outside, the parking lot glowed under overhead lamps. I stood by my car, breathing October air. My phone buzzed. Elise, how did it go? I typed. It's over. Tell you at home. I sat in the driver's seat and closed my eyes. I'd prepared for confrontation, for denial, for Lorraine to stay calm and deflect, not for her to break and admit everything in front of the entire community. But that's what happens when people get used to power. They forget it only works when people believe in it. I started the car and drove home. Streets quiet. The neighborhood looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. The fear was gone. I pulled into my driveway. Elise waited at the door. I got out. She said, well, I said, Malloy's filing charges. Lorraine and Dylan are suspended. It's done. She hugged me hard. I can't believe it. I could. I'd watched it happen. Watched 9 years of unchecked authority collapse in 15 minutes. Watched a woman who'd ruled through intimidation realize she'd been recorded the entire time. Watched her forget that threats only work in the dark. But standing there in my driveway, holding Elise, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, just tired. The kind of tired that comes after carrying something heavy for too long. I said, let's go inside. She nodded. We walked in together and closed the door. 3 weeks after the meeting, I received a notification from the district attorney's office. Lorraine Bishop was being charged with 7 counts of filing false police reports and 1 count of criminal intimidation. Each false report carried a maximum fine of $2,500 and 6 months in jail. The intimidation charge, a Class C felony, carries up to 3 years. Dylan Ricks faced 6 counts of criminal trespassing and 1 count of conspiracy. The letter included a trial date 4 months out. The trial never happened. 6 weeks later, Lorraine's attorney negotiated a plea agreement. Guilty to 5 counts of false reports and the intimidation charge. Sentence 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, $12,000 in fines, and mandatory anger management. Condition prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 10 years. Dylan took a similar deal. 1 year probation, $3,000 in fines. Both agreements were public record. I didn't attend the sentencing. I'd already said everything I needed to say. The HOA held emergency elections in November. 5 new board members. All homeowners I recognized from the meeting. People who'd stood up. People who'd been targeted too. Their first action was unanimous. Withdraw all outstanding violations against every homeowner. Refund all fines collected in the past year, and revise the bylaws. New rule, all violation notices require photographic evidence, 14-day cure periods, and board approval before contacting law enforcement. The changes passed with 42 votes in favor, 0 against. By December, life had mostly returned to normal. I filled in the trench and planted grass seed. The new growth would come in spring. I kept the security cameras up, not because I expected trouble, because I'd learned the value of documentation. Danny stopped asking about the police. She started sleeping through the night again. Elise stopped flinching every time the doorbell rang. One Saturday morning in January, almost a year after that first false parking complaint, I was back on the patio with my coffee. Danny threw the tennis ball for Max in the yard. The pines swayed in the winter wind. Everything looked the same as it had that March morning, but it felt different. Lighter. My phone buzzed. An email from someone in Florida. Subject, your video helped my case. I'd posted a 10-minute summary of the timeline on a homeowner advocacy site 3 months earlier. Faces blurred for privacy. Just the facts. The structure. The documentation process. It had been viewed 400,000 times. The email thanked me. Said they'd used the same methods against their own HOA. Won their case. I didn't reply. I just set the phone down and watched Danny laugh as Max caught the ball mid-air. Elise came out with her own coffee and sat beside me. She said, "What are you thinking about?" I said. "Nothing important." And she smiled. We sat there in silence for a while. The kind of silence that means you're home. Not just in a place, but in the feeling that no one can take that from you. Maybe that was the point all along. Not winning, just proving that regular people with cameras and patience and a refusal to be intimidated can still protect what's theirs. I looked at the backyard, at the spot where the trench used to be. The grass would grow back. It always does. If you've ever felt powerless against someone abusing authority, you're not alone. Thousands face HOA overreach or neighbors who think rules don't apply to them. The difference between staying trapped and breaking free is documentation and patience. At Karma Fence, we share stories of people who refused to back down and won using evidence, not anger. If this resonated, or if you have your own story, we'd love to hear it. Justice doesn't always come fast.